What's up, guys? Brady Figuel here, coming at you with a review of the new I Prevail album, Violent Nature, out today, Friday, September 19th. Full disclosure right out of the gates, I'm not really a fan of this band. Historically, their style has just watered down metalcore a bit too much for me personally. Like, I would say I Prevail is probably one of the poster children bands for what we call octanecore. So you may be wondering, why are you reviewing this album if it's not from a band you like? And normally that's not something I would do. But the reason why I wanted to is because the band actually did drum up some decent anticipation leading into this album. For me, most notably with the title track, which is the lead single, Violent Nature, which is a song that I will still have a little bit of criticism for, which I'll get into. But the idea that I Prevail with this album, and with Violent Nature being not only the lead single from it, but the title track, it was my hope that they would go for a bit more of an intense, angry sound with this record. So it made me curious about it. It made me want to give it an honest chance, give it an authentic review, listen to it, dive into it, and share my thoughts. And especially considering that this is the band's first album since the departure of clean vocalist Brian Burkheim. And also, let me be clear, I would love nothing more than for this album to be like one of my favorite albums of the year and for it to be like my top 10. There's nothing that brings me more joy than listening to an album by a band that I typically don't like and having the album end up actually impressing me and end up liking the album. I love when that happens. It doesn't happen often, but I'm always kind of hopeful that it will. So just know, if you're a fan of this band, because I know they do have a pretty large fan base, that I really wanted to love this album going into it, and I gave it a really fair chance. Just before I get into my criticisms, just wanted to get that out there. But anyways, I will get straight into what is largely my biggest gripe with this album. And it's something that's a bit counteractive to what I thought would be the main draw of the record. Just this angry, mean, aggressive vibe of the title track itself, of the album cover, of the title, Violent Nature. And this gripe I have is these fucking guitars. This might be one of the worst guitar tones I have ever heard on a modern metalcore album. That's not necessarily the band's fault. I mean, I'm not sure if maybe they were pushing for the guitars to sound like this, but it's largely a production issue. The guitar tone on this album just sounds so digital. It sounds so lightweight and so just meandering. It doesn't have any impact when these riffs or breakdowns hit. And what ends up happening is that the band actually drums up a decent amount of anticipation at times for these specific parts to hit, and then they hit and they just don't hit, if that makes sense. Some examples of exactly what I'm talking about. Pretty much all of the guitar parts on the intro track, Synthetic Soul, the breakdown on the next track, NWO. Also, pretty much all of the track, God, but in particular that final tempo change that just doesn't hit nearly as hard as it sounds like it should. There's a decent riff that comes in the song Rain that sounds really limp and really just overly synthesized that doesn't do it justice whatsoever. Stuff like this is just so frustrating because you hear the potential in a lot of these parts to crush, but they just don't because of how limp and flaccid and lightweight and overproduced yet underproduced this fucking guitar tone sounds. It is so frustrating. This is something that's pretty common with a lot of these what I'll call octanecore bands, that they put too much emphasis production-wise on the vocals, oftentimes on added studio effects, which does happen several times on this record. And it just takes away so much from the anger and the grit and the urgency that the guitars are supposed to give the song. And as a result, like I've said a few times now, the guitars just, they don't hit whatsoever, and the songs end up kind of flatlining as a result. And maybe the most frustrating thing about that is that despite, like I said, me not being that big of an I Prevail fan, there really isn't anything on this album stylistically that I think is bad. There's a few songs at their worst that I think are just a little forgettable or a little generic sounding, but there's nothing on here that disgusted me or made me want to throw my fucking phone in the garbage after hearing it. There's nothing bad on here to my ears, which makes it, again, so much more fucking frustrating. As a result, to me, the songs that stick out as the highlights on this record are the tracks that, for one, don't go for as much of a heavy sound, which normally would be more riff-focused, like the track Annihilate Me, which has this kind of dry, barren, doomy intro with this really cool, eerie mood that kind of maintains throughout the entire song, even when the chorus gets a bit more full, and the bridge actually gets heavy again, which is something that a lot of metalcore bands like this tend to botch, but in this case with this song, I think it actually sounds really smooth, like it's a really natural transition. The closer, Stay Away, also has similar qualities in the sense that the track is a bit more mood-focused. It's got some darker guitar melodies that I wish stood out a little bit more. The electronic verse on that song actually does a good job of maintaining that dark energy that the song sets. There's this industrial-leaning bridge section that adds a cool little flair to the track. Overall, I like the tension that one builds. But again, I do wish, even in those songs, that the guitars just had a little bit more presence, but with those tracks, it probably frustrates me the least, which as a result makes them the most enjoyable. All this being said, I mean, I will, of course, shout out some of the moments that stylistically on the heavier tracks I like. Like I mentioned earlier, the title track and the lead single, Violent Nature. It's got this just blisteringly heavy intro with that stomping snare drum. I love the energy that brings, and the main groove is pretty cool too, with those kind of chaotic lead sections floating over it. Later in the song, too, you get this really frantic, discordant breakdown with these, again, just really, like, chaotic-sounding drums. I think that was awesome, too. The track God is another one that I think is just genuinely angry-sounding. I do have a few criticisms that kind of go hand-in-hand for both of these tracks, though. For one, and this one probably applies more to God, that track feels like it is a little bit too stop-start, if that makes sense. Like, there are those genuinely heavy, urgent sections that I like. It was cool to see this band do some more of that and lean into more of an aggressive sound, a purely aggressive sound, but the track kind of stops and starts the entire time, and as a result, you never really are able to settle into that angry, vicious, nonstop, relentless vibe that I think the band could have executed well here. So as a result, it kind of ends up having the opposite effect as I think the band intended, in a sense that the quiet parts keep taking away from that energy. And the title track has maybe an element of that too when those verses hit, and again you kind of get when the music all drops out, when those vocals first kick in. Again, I just think that kind of erases all of the energy that had been established so far, and then when it kicks back in, it just doesn't quite feel the same. Another thing I didn't really like about the title track is its lyrics. In general, these lyrical themes of I'm sick, I'm twisted, I have a violent nature, it's just kind of cringy. I think lyrics like that work a little bit more when you listen to an album like Slipknot's Iowa, where Corey Taylor's talking about how he wants to slit your throat and fuck the wound. Like, he's just kind of saying shit. He's not telling you how sick and twisted he is. He's actually showing that in just the words he's saying. And then God has lyrics like set the world on fire just to watch you burn, which I feel like I've heard in like 20 different songs before. And there are a few kind of out of left field lyrics on this album that jumped out at me. Just sometimes they're just nonsensical. Like on Annihilate Me, when they say, I can't remember if I don't forget. Not really sure how that works or what that means. And there's some more generic ones like on Pray, Cut Me Open, Watch Me Bleed. I think some of these lyrical choices and word choices could have been a little bit more creative. And stylistically, moving on from the heavier tracks now, there are a decent amount of more melodic cuts on here, like the track Crimson and Clover, which is a full-on acoustic track all the way through, which is something that I respect them attempting. The main reason this song didn't do it for me is just that I feel like the melodies themselves just kind of fall somewhat emotionally flat, and the song ends up being a little bit dull. Some of the vocals, too, like early on in the song, are just a little bit overly edgy. Like, he kind of pronounces his words like that before he goes into the more melodic stuff. I think the song would have been a little bit more convincing if he just kind of sang normally. But like I said earlier, the more melodic attempts to me are the songs that work a little bit better on here because of just the guitar tone not being as much of an irritant. Like, I think Into Hell is a decent song. It's a bit more post-hardcore influenced. There's some cool melodies in the verses there. Overall, this song gave me like Dayseeker vibes in a positive way. The track Pray, too, both of these songs kind of have like these really full, saturated sounding choruses, which is a Dayseeker quality. Pray also has a nice, like, colorful main riff with some double bass under it. And again, sort of like I said about Annihilate Me earlier, there's a heavy bridge section in that song that, despite the weak guitar tone, at least is a smooth transition from like heavy to melodic and back. A lot of times songs like that just kind of feel robotic. And that does happen a few times on here. Like, I think Rain is a track where the moods do feel a little bit disjointed. That song overall is one of my least favorite ones on here. Like that, the cool main groove is okay. It's got that bubbly lead part over it, but I think the electronic verse in that song is a little bit cheap. The chorus sounds kind of lethargic from where I'm sitting. Again, you got that underwhelming riff in the bridge just because of how it's produced. The opener, Synthetic Soul, too, is a track that I think just isn't very consistent in its moods. So as a result, you can never really like emotionally follow what the band are trying to convey, because it has that kind of moody, somber piano intro with the delicate vocals over it, but then it kind of just stops suddenly and kicks into heavy music, and that mood just it was a little bit jarring or jostling. That's the best way I think I could put it. But overall, this album's not bad. It's really not. The main thing that weighs it down, like I've said 100 times now, is the guitar tone. But if the guitars were produced a bit better, I think I would be pretty impressed with this album, quite frankly. It's just a little bit ironic considering just the imagery of this album and the guitars themselves making it sound, the music itself sound almost lightweight, which is the opposite of that aesthetic. So overall, this album definitely has some bright moments, some flashes of brilliance, I guess you could say, to me, but they haven't really turned me with this record like I was hoping they would, and I would encourage the band on their next one to give the guitars some light of day and produce them a bit more authentically so they can actually be the driving force of the song, because I think it would help a lot of these tracks. This album gets a 13 out of 30 for me. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you've heard this album, remember to comment your thoughts below. Hit the subscribe button for more rock and metal-related content, of course. Check the description for all my links. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I will catch you guys later. Peace.